Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we sift through the noise, extract the most crucial insights, and give you, well, a shortcut to being truly well-informed. Today, you're joining us for a deep dive into some pretty fascinating declassified government documents. Our mission here is to explore two intriguing internal memoranda. They're from the Central Intelligence Agency's Central Cover Staff, often called CCS, and they both date from March 1978. Now, these documents were actually generated in direct response to specific requests from the House Select Committee on Assassinations, the HSCA.
Right, and these aren't just run-of-the-mill bureaucratic papers. They really offer a rare, almost surgical glimpse into how these major historical inquiries are conducted.
Yeah.
We get to see precisely what kind of detailed information emerges and, importantly, what doesn't when Congress starts asking for answers. Answers about people and organizations potentially linked to some of the most, well, sensitive investigations in U.S. history.
Okay, so let's unpack this then and see what these records actually reveal, because, the devil, as they say, is often in the details. We should probably start with the first memo. It's dated March 24th, 1978,
Mm-hmm.
and it's from the Plans and Review Group of the Central Cover Staff, the CCS. And it's a direct response to an HSCA request, specifically asking for files on 19 individuals.
Yeah, and what's immediately fascinating here, I think, is that this document functions almost like a literal inventory.
An inventory.
Yes, it doesn't just confirm if records exist. It itemizes precisely what the central cover staff held and, crucially, what it did not hold regarding these specific people.
Oh.
So this gives us a really transparent window into the very specific scope and maybe the limitations of their internal record keeping, at least for this particular office, the one dealing with cover.
Right, that makes sense. And as we start digging into the list, you see this consistent theme emerge, don't you? It's all about the meticulous tracking of an agent's cover.
Exactly. Cover is key here.
Take Mrs. G. Stanley Brown. She's identified as Vernie Dean Stevens Brown. The CCS held only 4 documents on her.
Just 4.
Yeah, just 4. We learn her birth date, August 12th, 1929, in Roanoke, Oklahoma, and that her husband, George Stanley Brown, was an agency employee from 52 to 62. It's a small detail, but it shows the baseline, I suppose.
It establishes a connection, yeah.
Then we have David E. Murphy. Now, he had approximately 100 documents.
100. That's a lot more.
A lot more. And primarily concerning his, and here's that phrase again, establishment, maintenance, and use of cover during his career from 1948 to 1975.
A long career, too.
Yeah. And Grayson Lynch, or maybe it's Grayston, the memo spells it both ways. He had around 60 documents, again, nearly all related to his cover from 61 to 71.
Mm-hmm. Cover.
And it notes he retired in 71, listing Tampa, Florida as his forwarding address. Just these little nuggets of information. But here's where I think it gets particularly intriguing. When we look at the Robert Moore entries.
Ah, yes, the Moores.
Because they highlight a key nuance in these kinds of inquiries. First, there's Robert Butler Moore. He had about 50 documents.
Okay.
Born in Mississippi, 1913, staff employee from 1950 to 71. And his records, again, primarily concerned his establishment, maintenance, and use of cover, notably including assignments in Miami from 61 to 62.
Right.
Seems pretty standard, right?
It does seem standard based on the pattern, but then you get to the other Robert Moore, Robert T. Moore.
Right.
And this is where the detail really screams for attention. He had fewer documents, about 25. Born in California in 1917, agency staff employee from 68 to 72.
Okay.
But the memo adds this crucial note. He retired in covert DAC status.
DC status. What's DAC?
DAC stands for Directly Assigned Cover. So it means the agency provided him with an official but non-agency identity for operational purposes.
Got it. So a deeper level of cover.
Exactly. And then the memo directly asks this question, and I'm quoting here, should advise if subject's agency affiliation remains classified information requiring protection.
Wow. So the fact they're even asking that question years after he retired in 72, that really stands out, doesn't it? What does that tell us about the layers of security involved?
Well, I think that's a critical distinction they're making. It really underscores the CIA's, let's say, incredibly long memory and the persistent need for operational security even long after someone's retired.
Especially someone with that DAC status.
Especially for someone with direct cover, yeah. It implies that for individuals whose identities were specifically fabricated or, supported by the agency for operations, revealing their past affiliation could still potentially compromise ongoing operations, or maybe even other individuals still undercover.
Whereas for a general staff employee, Maybe the concern is less acute after retirement.
Possibly. It really shows how seriously they took these layers of protection, particularly around cover identities.
Okay. And just to round out this first memo, we also see Bill Logan, or William John Logan. He had about 25 documents, again, mostly concerning his cover, employee from 67 to 72. And he resigned, famously, the memo says, by leaving no forwarding address.
Yeah, that detail always adds a little touch of mystery, doesn't it? Just gone.
It does.
But, if we connect this back to the bigger picture of this first memo, maybe the most significant detail isn't actually what was found, but what wasn't.
How so?
The fact that 13 of the original 19 individuals the HSCA specifically asked about, well, the memo states no information whatsoever was found in the CCS files for them.
13 out of 19, that's a majority.
It is, and that's just as telling, I think, as the files they did find. It clearly defines the specific scope and the limitations of this particular central cover staff's record.
Right, doesn't mean the agency had nothing on them elsewhere.
Exactly. It just means this specific department, the one focused on managing cover arrangements, didn't hold their primary files, or at least not files related to cover.
Okay, that makes sense. So having peeled back the layers of that first memo, which was largely focused on individual personnel files and all these nuances of cover.
Yeah, the DAC status and all that.
Right. The plot seems to thicken a bit with the second document. It's dated just 3 days later, March 27th, 1978.
3 days. That's quick.
It is quick, which suggests maybe a more urgent or perhaps a follow-up request from the HSCA. This memo, also from the central cover staff, provides supplemental information. And it broadens the scope, doesn't it? It includes specific organizations and some other prominent figures.
Absolutely. That swift follow-up just 3 days later, it really highlights the intense and dynamic nature of these congressional inquiries back then. One request often led immediately to additional searches, digging for more granular detail. It's almost like real-time bureaucratic archaeology.
Bureaucratic archaeology, I like that. And the second memo, it offers even more intriguing entries. Take George de Morenchild.
Ah, de Morenchild, a name many will recognize.
Definitely. A figure connected to the JFK assassination inquiries. The memo lists 5 documents on him, from 1954 to 1963.
Okay, 5 documents. What do they say?
Well, crucially, 4 of these comprised 4 contact reports with a commercial asset who was in touch with subject regarding a business activity in Haiti.
Haiti, a commercial asset. Wow.
Yeah, and there was also 1 document detailing the results of a trace request from April 25th to May 21st, 1963.
So what's really fascinating there is that the records on de Morenchild aren't just about, say, agency employment or simple background checks.
Right.
They explicitly detail interaction with a commercial asset in Haiti regarding business. That exemplifies how specific and sometimes kind of unusual the information in these cover files could be. It moves beyond just employment records into, well, operational contexts and third-party contexts.
It gives you a real sense of the granular detail the agency sometimes collected, even through its cover staff.
Precisely.
And the memo continues with other notable names. Leo Chern, for instance.
Yeah.
He had 21 documents from 54 to 64, plus approximately 100 more from 50 to 64.
Another substantial file.
Yes. And the CCS even maintained a separate file on the Research Institute of America, where Chern was the executive director. And again, these documents primarily concern, you guessed it.
Let me guess, establishment, maintenance, and use of cover.
Exactly. Then there's William Harvey, another significant figure. Around 50 documents, spanning 47 to 67, also concerning his establishment, maintenance, and use of cover as a staff employee. That theme of cover is just absolutely omnipresent in these CCS files.
It really seems to be the core function reflected in these records.
Now, the second memo also lists specific organizations and some other very prominent individuals that might surprise you. The International Rescue Committee, the IRC.
The IRC, okay.
12 documents from 1962 to 1970, and they addressed agency non-use of IRC and FOIA requests.
FOIA requests, that's interesting. FOIA is the Freedom of Information Act, of course.
Right.
So even back then, the IRC was turning up in agency documents, possibly in connection with requests from the public asking about any relationship between them.
Seems like it. Then we see Alexander Rourke. He has no record in CCS, similar to some of the individuals in the first memo.
Another no record.
But then you get Richard Helms.
Helms, the former director.
Exactly. Approximately 25 documents from 1956 to 1974. And these concerned TDI travel orders, cover documentation, and clearance verifications.
TDI travel orders. That's temporary duty travel. So official assignments, often overseas, likely involving specific cover arrangements. It gets into the practical mechanics.
Right, the mechanics of it all. And we also see James Angleton,
Angleton, head of counterintelligence for a long
the
time.
very same. Approximately 25 documents from 1950 to 1974 covering similar things. TDI travel orders, covered documentation, and retirement processing.
Retirement processing, again, seems standard for long-term staff.
And Raymond Rocca, another counterintelligence figure. Approximately 25 documents from 64 to 75 concerning cover matters pertaining to subject. Now, what's particularly striking for Helms, Angleton, and Rocca is this explicit note in the memo.
Oh, what does it say?
It says, no record in CCS of correspondence or other communications on the matters identified in Item 30. Now, we don't know what Item 30 was from the HSCA request.
But it suggests a very specific search parameter was used.
Exactly. A specific question was asked about correspondence or communications on a certain topic, and this office, the CCS, turned up nothing for those three key figures on that specific point.
Interesting. Again, defining the limits of these particular files.
Precisely. Finally, we see the Southern Research Corporation listed as no record in CCS.
Okay.
And then the Wackenhut Corporation. Now, this one had a significant volume, between 100 and 150 documents, dating from 1963 to 1977.
Wackenhut, the private security firm.
That's the one. And the documents concerned contacts with Wackenhut officials. That's a substantial amount of documentation about contacts with an external company.
It certainly is. And, if we try to connect all this from the second memo to the bigger picture, again, these instances of no record for Rourke, for Southern Research, for that specific query about Helms, Angleton, and Rocca, they're just as informative as the files they did find.
Because they draw the boundaries.
They draw the boundaries of what this specific CIO department, the Central Cover Staff, actually held, and we see these recurring themes constantly. Cover, TDI travel orders, retirement processing. These clearly reveal the standard categories of information that were maintained for agency personnel by this particular office. It's really a window into the core bureaucratic concerns of managing clandestine identities and operations.
So wrapping this up, what does this all really mean for you, the learner?
Yeah.
We've just explored two declassified memos from 1978, and they offer this really remarkable glimpse into the meticulous and, yes, sometimes surprisingly limited information held by the Central Cover Staff. Information regarding individuals and organizations of intense interest to a major congressional investigation, the HSCA. We've seen the sheer volume of material that sometimes needed to be sifted through.
Hundreds of documents in some cases.
Right. We've seen the specific bureaucratic categories like cover and TDI travel, and we've seen the crucial implications of little details, like someone having a covert DAC status that apparently required ongoing secrecy protection decades later.
Yeah. These documents really show us the intricate bureaucratic machinery that was at work decades after the main events they relate to. They confirm certain specific connections, but they also reveal that long tail of secrecy and operational security.
It feels like a powerful reminder, doesn't it? That historical truth often lies not just in the big sweeping narratives, but in these granular administrative details, in the meticulous, sometimes mundane records of an organization's day-to-day functions.
Absolutely. That's often where the real story is hidden.
So for you listening, this deep dive hopefully shows how seemingly dry administrative documents, like these memos, can actually open up entirely new perspectives on historical events. They hint at the complex lives and the associations of the people involved, and the enduring effort required to protect intelligence operations.
And maybe this raises an important final question for anyone trying to piece together history from these kinds of records. When a government agency responds to a formal request, like from Congress, with no record, what does that truly signify?
Right. Is it definitive?
Is it really an absolute absence of any connection? Or does it simply mean that the specific information requested wasn't held by this specific department or in this specific type of file? It leaves open the possibility, doesn't it, that other crucial pieces of the historical puzzle might still be found elsewhere, perhaps in another file cabinet, another directorate, or even another agency entirely.
It forces us to consider the limitations and maybe the distributed nature of historical records within large bureaucracies, something to definitely keep in mind.